Welcome to Oxford. My name is Rabbi Michael Rosenfeld-Schueler. I'm Jewish chaplain with University Jewish Chaplaincy. We're going to be doing a walking tour of Oxford, medieval Oxford, and our tour begins here in the Oxford Castle, which is behind me. It begins here. Why? Well, because in the Middle Ages, shortly after the year 1066, William the Conqueror came to England, and shortly thereafter, around 1075, the Jewish people started to settle in Oxford. At least it's thought that's around when the Jews started to settle here. The first noted time of when Jews were actually living here is in 1141, when there's a time when Stephen, who was king at the time, demanded money from Aaron, somebody who's living what is in current day around on the high street, and demanded money, payment, tax, and wasn't given. The house was burned down, and as a result of that, there's a marking and note of it. The castle is important. Why? Because, well, as the Jewish people, not being Christians, they were wards of the king, and that meant that they would sometimes be imprisoned in the castle, or sometimes seek refuge there. As well as what's really interesting is there was also these archaea, these arks, which were these locked chests, which were set up across the country in the 1100s, and these were something that's they were set up as a way of keeping the records straight of who owned which lands. Many of these have not been well preserved. However, the one in Oxford has the information in it is that coming from it was very, very important. So the 100 roll, for example, is something which was almost like a census taken in 1275, 1278, around that time. So it gives a very detailed description of who was living where, which streets, which houses, which gives us, living in current day, a very good picture. We can identify where the Jewish people were living, who owned the houses, and what happened to them. So this is something that will be, of course, very interesting as we come into learning more about Oxford. The second stop on our walking tour is here, which would have been in the Jewish area where the Jews would have been living in the heart of Oxford. The prime location was, well, due partially to the fact that this was the place that was a bit smelly. This is where the fishmongers, the fish market would have been. This is where the tanning spot would have been. So although the location itself was quite prime as far as real estate goes, well, it had something which was a little bit to be avoided. And the Jews, this is where the Jews settled. To my right is where Great Jewry would have been. That was a street which was well known as being the spot currently known as St. Aldate's. And that's where the synagogue would have been, as well as perhaps that's where the mikveh would have been. Now, standing in front of me and behind the camera is a spot which is quite interesting because in recent years there were some archaeological finds that came from some digs, and comparisons with other digs determined something very interesting about the diet of the inhabitants from this time in this Jewish neighborhood. So doing lipid residue studies, as in latrines, they discovered, labs discovered that a few things. One is that the Jews living in Oxford in the Middle Ages were avoiding pork and pig. There is finds of lots of chicken bones, bird, poultry bones, as well as ruminants, and the lipid residue showed signs of ruminant animals in the pottery, and the avoidance or no pork, no pig products, which is something quite interesting in comparison with other similar sites which were very high in the pig meat and residue remaining from there. Behind me, would have been the home of Jacob, as these are some of the wealthier landowners in Oxford. Also in this direction is the home of Jacob, who was wealthier landowner and somebody who sold some of his land to Walter de Merton. Now, Walter de Merton is somebody who becomes quite important in the founding of Merton College, one of perhaps the oldest college in Oxford. And so the land which was purchased then went on to become part of the beginning of Merton College. The oldest document in the archive in Merton College, of the college documents itself, is that of this transfer of land sale, written as well in Hebrew, which is also quite interesting. Many of the lands, when the Jews before they were kicked out, some of the lands were confiscated by the crown and then kind of absorbed within and became lands that were owned by the crown, confiscated. And so by the time the Jews left in 1290, were kicked out, there actually weren't that many remaining, as they'd been depleted the resources, and the community were quite struggling at that point. Here we are. Behind me is Christ Church College, Oxford, and also an area called Dead Man's Walk, which is the current Memorial Gardens. Two important points here. One is that in 1931, 32, 33 is when Albert Einstein visited Christ Church and came out. A number of other academics and scholars were able to escape Nazi Germany, brought about through the funding coming from the Society for the Protection of Science and Learning, which brought out thousands of refugees and people that were fleeing from Nazi Germany. Among them, Albert Einstein. After World War II, I think there were about 16 Nobel Prize winners were in that conglomerate of people that were escaping. But I always do think about Albert Einstein when coming through this area. Dead Man's Walk gets its name from quite early on. The Jewish community, of course, wanted to bury its dead, the deceased, those that were needing burial. Initially, this only could happen in London, which is where Jewish burial was happening. So that must have been quite a difficult feat to get the deceased all the way to London from Oxford. At a later time, permission was granted to bury in Oxford. And another stop on this walking tour will indeed be that of going to the old medieval cemetery. Now, or what remains of it. But Dead Man's Walk perhaps was the space, the pathway that was used to escort and to have the levaya, having the funeral and the procession leaving the city and going out towards the burial grounds. Here we are again at the Oxford Botanical Gardens, which is located over there. Behind me is a memorial marking the spot of the medieval Oxford Jewish Cemetery, which would have been in about this spot, as well as on the other side of the High Street, which is where Magdalen College is and has been for hundreds of years. So the Jewish community would have taken the deceased out to this spot. A number of years ago, there were some human remains, some human bones, which were found in some building works which were happening at Magdalen College, just across the street. And for the first time in my life, participated in a burial of the bones, which were buried in Magdalen College, and there's a plaque there to mark the spot of where that is. Some lab tests showed that on those bones, they were from the time period of when the Jews would have been living in Oxford. So it's thought to be, and likely, that those were indeed Jewish remains which were there. That brings us to the end of our walking tour. Thanks so much for joining. And what we didn't see are so many things in Oxford, so what you all have to do is actually come here and pay a visit and come and visit. There's the Bodleian Library housing manuscripts, Hebrew and Jewish manuscripts, thousands of them from the Geniza, from the Cairo Geniza, from there's Maimonides, Rambam's signature on his Mishnah Torah, signing that it's a good copy of his Mishnah Torah, and there's just so much to see. And wishing all of you well. Thanks for joining.